I didn't know racism until I went to Greenwich. That was the first time I ever heard the N-word. Time in his life that my dad's whacked across the face.
For over 6 decades, Jane Fonda played by Hollywood's rules. She smiled at the premieres, won the Oscars, marched in protests, and kept her cool in interviews. But behind the scenes, she was taking notes, watching, waiting, and silently enduring the egos, the cruelty, and the men who thought the set revolved around them. She didn't complain. Not then. But now, at 87, she's telling the truth. With nothing left to prove and no one left to please, Jane Fonda just named 5 actors she couldn't stand. Not disliked, not had a falling out with, couldn't stand. Men she called arrogant, misogynistic, even emotionally abusive, and she's not pulling punches. From a legendary co-star who refused to kiss her on screen, to an old-school icon who cut her down with backhanded compliments, Fonda's revelations are turning Hollywood's golden legends into something far more human. Flawed, complicated, and in some cases, unbearable. She doesn't want revenge. She just wants the truth on record. And now that it is, you won't look at these names the same way again. Before Jane Fonda became a global icon, before the Oscars, the activism, or the protests that had presidents calling her unpatriotic, she was just a child in Greenwich, Connecticut. Surrounded by privilege, she lived in a world that felt clean and polished on the outside. But underneath the wealth and old Hollywood legacy was a young girl being shaped by moments that would never make headlines. One of those moments came swiftly, violently, and without warning. Jane was still young, maybe 7 or 8, when she heard a word she didn't understand. Ugly, loaded, and sharp like a blade. The N-word. She didn't grasp its weight, not yet, but she repeated it aloud, the way kids repeat anything that sounds new. And that's when her father, Henry Fonda, stoic, serious, almost always emotionally distant, did something he had never done before. He slapped her, across the face, hard. No explanation, no warm lecture, just a sting that said, "Don't ever say that again." It was the only time he ever hit her, but it left a mark far deeper than the skin. That single act would crack open her view of the world. It wasn't just about the word, it was about what the word meant. About power, about cruelty, about how some people suffer while others look the other way. For Jane, that slap was more than just punishment. It was an awakening, and it changed her. From that moment forward, she began paying attention to the cruelty around her, the inequality, the arrogance, the unchecked behavior that was often brushed off as just how things work. She started noticing the things most people tried to ignore. The way women were talked over, the way men yelled at assistants behind closed doors, the way certain stars could treat people terribly and still be celebrated. That childhood moment wasn't just a parenting lesson. It was the beginning of Jane's lifelong refusal to stay quiet. She never forgot what it felt like to be corrected so harshly for a mistake she didn't fully understand. And it taught her something even more important. When you do understand, you have no excuse to stay silent. To the outside world, Jane Fonda and Robert Redford were the perfect Hollywood pair. Handsome, intelligent, beloved by critics and audiences alike, they lit up the screen in every film they shared. 4 movies over 5 decades. That kind of chemistry doesn't happen often. And when it does, fans assume there's something magical behind the scenes. But Jane Fonda just shattered that illusion. She's been clear. Redford wasn't easy to work with. In fact, he was difficult. Moody. Cold. Emotionally distant to the point where she often questioned if she'd done something wrong. For years, she blamed herself, trying to be friendlier, warmer, more accommodating, hoping it might lift his dark moods, but nothing changed. And the truth hit her late in life, during their final collaboration, Our Souls at Night. She was nearly 80 years old when she finally realized his behavior had nothing to do with her. His moods weren't her fault. They never were. This realization wasn't just professional, it was personal. It was about the emotional labor women are taught to perform. Soothing, smoothing, explaining away the behavior of powerful men. For decades, Jane did that dance. And only with age did she understand how deeply unfair it was. Redford wasn't cruel, he wasn't a monster. But he was guarded, detached, and at times unknowable. He didn't like intimacy. He hated kissing scenes. Fonda, who was often cast opposite him in romantic roles, quietly accepted this quirk for years. She never pushed, never asked why. But now, she's begun to speak up. And one sentence in particular stopped people cold. "He has an issue with women," she said. Just that. No elaboration, no clarification. But when Jane Fonda speaks that plainly, it doesn't need explanation. The most bittersweet part? She was in love with him. Deeply. During 3 out of the 4 films they made together, she carried a quiet, private affection for Redford. That love, unspoken and unresolved, only added to the complexity of their performances. The audience saw tenderness and connection, but what they didn't see was the emotional wall that never came down. Redford may have been her favorite co-star on camera, but behind the scenes, Fonda was left doing the emotional heavy lifting alone. And by the end of their journey, she stopped trying to pretend it didn't hurt. Not every chapter in Jane Fonda's career was defined by disappointment. Some relationships defied the odds. Some grew stronger with time. And none of them matched the depth and endurance of her bond with Lily Tomlin. In a business built on competition and fleeting alliances, their friendship stands out like a lighthouse in the fog. It wasn't just chemistry, it was recognition. 2 women from wildly different worlds. Fonda, born into Hollywood royalty. Tomlin, a sharp-witted outsider from working-class Detroit. They met in the late 1970s and instantly saw something in each other. Something rare, something true. After watching Tomlin's one-woman show in Los Angeles, Fonda didn't just become a fan. She made a decision. She wouldn't make 9 to 5 without Lily Tomlin. Period. That kind of creative loyalty is almost unheard of in Hollywood. But Fonda wasn't looking for just another co-star. She was building a sisterhood. And it worked. 9 to 5 became a cultural landmark. It wasn't just funny, it was fearless. 3 women, Fonda, Tomlin, and Dolly Parton, taking on a sexist boss and an entire corporate system. Audiences loved the humor, but beneath the laughs was a message about power, dignity, and female rage that had rarely been seen on screen. That film did more than launch a movement. It bonded Jane and Lily for life. Over the years, they kept coming back to each other. Guest appearances, cameos, red carpets, award shows. But it wasn't until Grace and Frankie, decades later, that the full magic of their connection came alive again. The show was supposed to be a comedy. What it became was something far more emotional. 2 older women, thrown together by betrayal, building a new life on their own terms. Art imitating life. Fonda played the tightly wounded Grace. Tomlin, the eccentric and soulful Frankie. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the roles reversed. Fonda found safety in Lily's presence. "She grounds me," Jane said. "She makes me laugh. I feel safe with her." That feeling is rare in an industry obsessed with image, control, and competition. Lily Tomlin didn't just accept Jane. She saw her. She challenged her. She didn't care about the headlines or the legacy. She cared about the person behind them. And that grounded, no-nonsense energy allowed Fonda to drop the armor she had worn for decades. Their friendship is built on respect, laughter, shared values, and the kind of quiet, unshakable bond that Hollywood rarely nurtures but can never fake. Sometimes, it's the smallest moments that leave the deepest mark. For Jane Fonda, that moment came late in life, on a quiet film set, with a scene that almost didn't happen. The year was 2022. Fonda was in her 80s, starring in Moving On, a dark comedy about grief, revenge, and late-life reckoning. Her co-star? Richard Roundtree, the original John Shaft, a legend in his own right. They played ex-spouses reuniting after years of silence, navigating old wounds with sharp wit and surprising tenderness. At the heart of their arc was a single kiss. One scene. One moment of vulnerability between two people who'd been through everything and still had enough left to risk one more emotional leap. But when the day came to shoot that kiss, Jane Fonda was sick, really sick, congested, weak, barely able to breathe through her nose. Still, she showed up. They filmed everything around the kiss, dialogue, angles, reactions, but skipped the kiss itself. Fonda just wasn't well enough, and that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Weeks later, the production called Richard Roundtree back to set. For one reason only, to kiss Jane Fonda. No lines, no blocking, no reshoots, just a kiss. It could have been awkward. It could have been absurd. But instead, it was something quietly beautiful. Two veteran actors, decades into their careers, treating a moment of late-in-life intimacy with the same care and reverence as their first roles. Fonda, ever the professional, found the humor in it. She was in her 80s, yet still drawing a man to set just for a kiss. Roundtree, known for playing tough, cool characters, leaned into the moment with grace and warmth. And when they finally filmed it, something clicked. The kiss wasn't just for the characters. It was for them, too. The crew laughed lovingly. The director called it one of the most charming scenes he'd ever captured. And the audience? They felt it. Real affection, real history, real stakes. Not because of what was said, but because of what was shown. That love, tenderness, and vulnerability aren't bound by youth. They don't expire. And they don't need to be flashy to be powerful. Tragically, Richard Roundtree passed away in October 2023, just over a year after the film premiered. That kiss, meant to be a footnote, became a legacy moment. For Fonda, it's now a memory heavy with meaning. What began as a rescheduled shoot has become a symbol of everything she's fought to portray her entire life. That aging doesn't erase desire, intimacy, or emotional depth. It simply refines it. Jane Fonda has never been afraid of difficult men. Her career is filled with them. Directors, co-stars, executives, politicians. She's navigated their tempers, their egos, their genius. But with Jean-Luc Godard, the experience was something else entirely. When asked recently about the legendary French director, Fonda didn't hedge her words. She didn't offer platitudes or polite distance. She said clearly and firmly, he was a great filmmaker, but as a man, no. Just that. Simple, final, and devastating. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness. Just the kind of clarity that only comes after years of reflection and years of enduring the emotional coldness that too often hides behind the label of artistic brilliance. In 1972, Fonda worked with Godard on Tout va bien, a politically radical film shot during one of the most volatile periods of both their lives. She was in the middle of her anti-war activism. He was deep into Marxist ideology, dismantling every narrative convention he'd once helped create. On paper, it made sense. Two revolutionaries pushing against the system, channeling chaos into cinema. But in practice, it was suffocating. Godard didn't direct actors. He used them, reduced them to symbols, puppets for his ideas. Fonda, an actress who poured emotional truth into every role, found herself dehumanized by the very process. She wasn't asked what she thought. She wasn't encouraged to explore the character. She was simply expected to perform mechanically, obediently, and without question. She never publicly called it abuse. But she's made it clear. It was not collaboration. It was a warning. That brilliance, when untethered from empathy, becomes tyranny. That a man can change cinema forever and still fail completely at being kind. Her criticism wasn't about petty grievances. It was about the bigger picture, about how often genius is used to excuse cruelty. How many actors, especially women, are told to endure mistreatment because the man behind the camera is brilliant? Fonda refuses to play that game anymore. Her words weren't laced with rage, they were delivered with quiet finality. As a man, no. And that silence after no, that was the loudest part. It was an indictment, not just of Godard, but of an entire system that still struggles to separate talent from decency. It was supposed to be a dream project, one of those rare moments in Hollywood where art, family, and legacy all converge. On Golden Pond brought together three titans: Jane Fonda, her father Henry Fonda, and the legendary Katharine Hepburn. For Jane, it wasn't just a film, it was a deeply personal mission. She had purchased the rights to the play herself, determined to give her aging, ailing father one final role that mirrored their own complicated relationship. A chance for art to bridge a lifetime of emotional distance. But while she was fighting for a farewell with her father, she was also quietly battling something else: Katharine Hepburn's cold, watchful disapproval. Fonda has never sugarcoated it. "She didn't like me," she once said plainly, and that one sentence carried decades of weight. Hepburn was fiercely loyal to Henry, whom she deeply admired. And when she arrived on set, she made it clear. Jane, with her activist reputation and Hollywood royalty status, didn't impress her. There was no shouting, no arguments, no dramatic blow-ups. But the tension hung in the air like fog over the lake. It was in the glances, the tone, the clipped responses. Hepburn didn't hide her skepticism, and Jane felt it, every day. But she didn't retaliate. She observed. She absorbed. And what she saw left a mark. Hepburn was disciplined, unwavering, and brutally honest. She once told Fonda she admired her athleticism but didn't think much of her acting. It was classic Hepburn. Sharp, unsentimental, and oddly revealing. And Fonda didn't forget it. Not because it hurt her ego, but because it forced her to confront something she didn't want to admit. She craved Hepburn's approval. Even as a two-time Oscar winner, even as the producer of the very film they were starring in, Jane wanted to be liked, respected, accepted. But that approval never came. Still, she never let the chill between them tarnish what On Golden Pond meant. The film was a triumph. Her father won his first and only Oscar. Their scenes together were filled with real emotion, sometimes scripted, sometimes not. And Hepburn? She was magnificent. Fonda has always said the experience was glorious, and she means it. Glorious but complicated, tense, and quietly painful. Over time, Fonda came to appreciate what Hepburn represented. Not warmth, not friendship, but something else. Uncompromising excellence. Hepburn didn't play favorites. She didn't flatter. She demanded the best. And maybe, in her own way, that was a kind of respect. Not the kind Jane was hoping for, but the kind she eventually understood. Looking at the list, Redford, Godard, Hepburn, it's tempting to see patterns, big names, powerful men, legends in their own right. But that's not what Jane Fonda is doing. This isn't a smear campaign, it's not a takedown. It's something far more honest and far more rare in Hollywood, a reckoning. At 87, Jane Fonda isn't settling scores. She's just done pretending that the behind-the-scenes pain didn't exist. She's finally putting her own experience on the record, in her own voice, on her own terms. And what she reveals isn't just about the people she couldn't stand. It's about the system that enabled them, the unspoken rules that told women to stay quiet, smooth things over, take the blame, and carry the emotional weight so the men around them could keep being brilliant. For decades, Fonda did exactly that. She tried to fix moods that weren't hers to fix. She tried to earn approval from people who had already decided she didn't belong. She tried to stay professional even when the environment wasn't, and that's what makes these stories so powerful, not the gossip but the growth. Each name she shares isn't just an anecdote. It's a chapter in a much larger story, a woman learning to stop apologizing for making other people uncomfortable with her talent, her truth, and her presence. She's showing us what it looks like when a woman finally decides she doesn't need to be liked to be respected. And even in her criticism, there's grace. She doesn't call anyone evil, she doesn't exaggerate, she doesn't cancel. Instead, she tells the truth quietly, precisely, and without fear. Because Jane Fonda knows what so many others are still learning. Legacy isn't just about who applauded you. It's about who you stood up for, who you stood up to, and what you refused to let slide. In an industry that loves illusions, Jane Fonda is choosing reality, and in doing so, she's rewriting the story of what it means to age with power. Not fading quietly into nostalgia, but speaking louder than ever before. Jane Fonda didn't wait until the world asked. She spoke up when it mattered most, when she had nothing to gain, no careers to protect, and no illusions left to maintain. Her list of difficult co-stars wasn't about bitterness. It was about clarity, about finally naming the weight she carried in silence for decades. These weren't just personalities, they were patterns: emotional distance, quiet contempt, unearned authority masked as genius. And for years, she made room for it, smiled through it, delivered Oscar-worthy performances while walking on eggshells. Now, she's pulling back the curtain. Not to shame, but to tell the fuller version of the story. The version we never got in press junkets or studio-controlled narratives. And that's the point. Hollywood has long been a place where reputations are sculpted and preserved like marble statues. But Jane Fonda is reminding us that behind every legend is a human being. Flawed, messy, sometimes impossible. And sometimes, the real strength isn't in enduring that quietly. It's in saying it out loud. Because every name she mentioned, Redford, Hepburn, Goddard, was considered untouchable. And yet, here she island touching them, not with vengeance but with truth. That's what makes her voice more powerful than ever. In an age where silence is easy and complicity is expected, Jane Fonda's refusal to stay quiet is revolutionary. So maybe this isn't just a story about 5 actors she couldn't stand. Maybe it's about every woman who's ever been told to tolerate the intolerable. Maybe it's about the cost of silence. Or maybe it's about the kind of legacy that doesn't just rest on awards but on courage, clarity, and finally, freedom. Because after all this time, Jane Fonda isn't asking for respect, she's demanding it.